In this video, I hope to increase your fight IQ by showing you how to avoid getting countered by your opponents by creating distance after striking. I'll be showing you my favorite ways to counter the counter, as well as the endless different options you have to counter your opponent's counter. This might sound confusing at first, but I'll be breaking down how we can punch and counter our opponent's counter punches with our counter punches or kicks, as well as how we can punch and counter our opponent's counter kicks with punches. Then we can also kick, then counter our opponent's counter punches with punches or kicks, and so on. I'm sure you heard this before, but basics win fights. It's not about how many techniques you know, but how good you are at your basic offensive attacks, defense, and counters. Then, how good are you at chaining them together in real time, depending on how your opponent reacts. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce you guys to my How to Hit and Hold Pads program. You may not think you need it, but I actually highly recommend it as it's one of the most important programs I currently offer. Not only will you learn how to hit pads properly for sharper technique, but you'll learn how to hold safely and optimally for your teammates. And through pad holding, you will actually develop your timing, reaction, and distance management skills for sparring. Additionally, you'll learn the best interactive combinations and counters that will come out when sparring. Once you complete this program, you get to send me a video of your training where you'll get personal feedback from me and have the opportunity to obtain my level 1 hit and hold pad certification. For more information, check out the link below. So I'm sure you guys have all been here, moving forward at your opponent and getting intercepted by your opponent's counters, whether that is a teep, low kick, body kick, or punch. We often see in amateur fights where right from the bell, both opponents charge forward at each other and attack. They end up tying up a lot and clinching until the ref breaks it up. Or both fighters stand and bang, and pretty much the fighter with more cardio, speed, or power wins on more volume or points. I actually watched the full fight, and although the fighter in the blue won, I believed he could have won with much less damage taken. If you guys want to learn how to deal with opponents who recklessly move forward with punches, check out my video on my top 9 ways to deal with aggressive opponents. I've linked it in the description box below. So not all the time, but more often than not, we see professional fighters take their time to feel out their opponents before attacking. A rule to always keep in mind is, when you attack, that is when you are most open. Always assume that a skilled opponent will try to counter you when you move in or attack. So I rather actually wait for my opponent to attack first so I can counter. But if both fighters do that, it's better to be the one taking the center of the ring or cage and pressuring forward. So when you are walking down your opponent, just be ready to pull back. For example, here I moved forward and quickly got intercepted by a teep. I quickly recognized that and moved forward again, but this time I was ready to scoop under the teep and countered. Now, when you do throw a punch, be ready to pull back. The first step is reading a pattern in our opponent's natural counter reaction. You should always use a long jab, I call it a flick jab, as not only a measuring stick to find your range to set up other attacks, but as a tester or a bait to see what your opponent will try to counter with. I am not overcommitting on my jab, just being as long as I can with it. You never know what that counter will be. As you can see, a counter low kick is very common, especially when you have a wide and narrow stance like me. Another common counter is circular punches, known as the check hook, but expect straight punches too. If it is a straight punch, you want to also parry instead of just pulling back, as a straight punch is longer than a circular punch. And finally, a third common counter to the jab is a roundhouse kick to the body. Once we see our opponent counter with something, not all the time, but often enough, they will repeat the same counter, especially in a high intensity, stressful situation, since that is their natural reaction. So now we can try to work on countering their counter. So here I threw my jab. Knowing my partner Hamza loves the intercepting lead body kick, I pulled back and was ready to undercatch his lead kick and counter with a 3-punch combination. It obviously helps a lot more if you know your opponent's style. That is why people study their opponent's footage. But the goal is to hit, don't get hit, and hit again, and repeat. So of course, the more you spar the same partner, the more you know what they like to do, and the easier it is to bait and counter them. Now, say we know our opponent is a boxer. It's pretty safe to assume that they are going to try to counterpunch you after your jab. One of the most easiest counter the counters is pulling back after the jab and into your kick. So I threw a nice long jab, pulled back so I had enough distance to see his counter jab coming, parried it, then stepped into the pivoted position with my rear foot and into my inside low kick. The lead kick is the quickest counter because it is in the front. We can obviously do the same lead kick but to the body. I also really like the exact same sequence, but counter with the outside low kick. The timing is a bit different though, because it is our rear leg, we need to step back to create space, then throw the kick. So it is slightly slower. If you think you got good timing, try to time that low kick to the calf when your opponent jabs back. You can end up kicking their leg right underneath them. We don't always have to test with our jab. We can also throw a cross to make our opponents react with a counterpunch. Then pull back and into that lead low kick or lead body kick. Again, if your opponents throw a hook, you can just lean back. But if it is a straight punch, you should try to parry it to be safe instead of just leaning. And here after my cross, my opponent threw an overhand right, so I had to 360 block before kicking. Here are a few other examples of how I tested with my jab, pulled back and countered my opponent's counter kicks.
Drop your hand movement a little bit. That's it.
So now let's say our opponent is a boxer and we are comfortable with our boxing counters. Let's go back to sticking that jab and pulling back immediately after to counter their counterpunch. The most common counterpunch to the jab is the right straight. So I like to counter with a check left hook.
Ooh, we put that sriracha on.
You can also follow up with a cross after the hook. Or counter with a jab cross. Here's another one. Jab, then slip and cross at the same time. The options are endless depending on how many counters you know, but I'm just showing you my personal favorites. What if your opponent counters with that left hook? I personally like to pull back and fire back with a cross. If you think your opponent is too close for you to lean back, I like to carriage block and throw that same cross down the middle. These ones are hard to see, so here is a replay in slow motion. You can even pull back and throw a check left hook. Similarly, we can counter the counter after throwing our cross. Here are 5 random different counter the counters after throwing the cross. Number 1, cross, slip the left straight and into the check left hook. 2, cross, deflect the right straight with a shoulder roll and into the check left hook. 3, cross, cross parry the right straight and into the check left hook. 4, cross, 360 block the right hook and into the check left hook. 5, cross, pull back against the right hook and jab cross. And finally, after throwing a kick, we can also counter our opponent's counterpunch. Similar to how we can test with a jab and also try to land the jab, we can also test and try to land kicks without any setup. Not only should we try to be as far as we can while still reaching our target, a really important detail when kicking is to recoil back into our stance so we are ready to defend punches, but also so we are as far as possible from our opponents in order to see the counter strikes coming and then counter the counter. For example, here after I threw my kick, I created space, parried the cross and into my own cross. Again, these options are endless. Here's another example of the exact same sequence. We can also throw a low kick, parry the cross and into our jab cross. We can even throw a calf kick, do the same, and parry the cross and into the jab cross. What's next? A calf kick, parry the jab, and into a check left hook. And here's another example of the exact same sequence except I followed up with my cross. We can also throw our lead calf kick, parry the right straight and into our cross. Those were some examples of throwing our kicks, then countering our opponent's punches with punches. Well, we can also throw our kicks and counter our opponent's punches with kicks as well. Here, I threw my outside low kick, parried the counter jab and into another outside low kick. Here, I did the exact same thing but countered with an inside low kick. And here, I countered with a lead body kick. The options are endless. You can mix it up however you want. We can even do an inside low kick, defend the counterpunch, and into an outside low kick. How about a rear body kick? Parry the right straight and into the lead low kick. What if our opponent counters back with a left kick? We could go back to our first example of brushing or catching the kick and into our counter punches. And one last example. We throw our left body kick and our opponent counters with punches to his left body kick. I would simply create space after kicking while simultaneously parrying their punches and brush that left body kick and into that same hook low kick counter.